The United States government is coming apart at the seams. Let's start with Hunter Biden, the esteemed, super smart, according to his father, son of the President of the United States. And formerly, of course, the son of the Vice President of the United States, who had special responsibility for Ukraine, a matter which may be of more and more and more significance. Hunter Biden struck a sweetheart deal which Joe Biden's Department of Justice blessed, but the judge threw it out in the court today. It was thrown out because in a little noticed sub clause in the agreement reached between the defense and the Department of Justice, clemency, immunity from further prosecution on matters surrounding with any federal investigation underway would be granted to Hunter Biden in exchange for pleading guilty to gun and tax charges. Gun and tax charges sufficiently serious that would put most Americans behind bars, but were not to put him behind bars. The judge, noticing this tiny little clause in the detail, threw the whole thing out because, of course, the feds are currently investigating Hunter Biden on very much more serious charges than tax and possession of a firearm, which he had improperly obtained by not telling the authorities of his crack cocaine addiction. I'm not making any of this up. This is the presidential household we are talking about. The feds are investigating not just Hunter Biden, but the big guy, which we can now openly state to have been Joe Biden, the then Vice President of the United States. Why do I dwell on this? Not because I take schadenfreude at the travails of the presidential son. Such things can happen to any father. And a father's love for his son will be unconditional, whatever he has done. I'm actually not interested in Hunter Biden, except in as much as he has so obviously received special presidential son treatment under the U.S. injustice system. But I am interested in the big guy, and so should you be, because the labyrinthian corruption that clearly existed, clearly I say now, between the Biden crime family and the oligarchs and their government in Kiev cannot be separated from the decision to drag us right to the precipice of World War III with a nuclear-armed superpower in the Russian Federation. Because, ponder this, if the walls of Kiev and its regime were to tumble down, if the books were to be fully opened, not just the presidential family would be exposed as up to their neck in the filthiest of corruption with one of the dirtiest regimes in the entire world, a point on which everyone used to be in agreement 550 days ago, to be precise. But the sons and daughters of all of the American oligarchy have had their noses in the trough of Ukrainian money. I'm talking the sons of Kerry. I'm talking of the sons of Romney. I'm talking of the sons of Pelosi. I'm talking of all of the political classes, progeny, who inexplicably, in a country that most Americans could not identify on a map, were drawn like bees to a honeypot or flies to a defecation so that they could get their noses in that filth and kick some of it back. We know that now for sure. The kickback to the big guy was described as 10%. Now 10% of bugger all is bugger all, but 10% of tens of millions is a very great deal of money indeed, especially if you don't declare it to the IRS, especially if you don't declare it to the White House in which you are serving. Joe Biden was vice president to President Barack Obama, about whom we must now speculate, as everyone else is. The odds of drowning, death by drowning, are 12,300 to 1. The odds of drowning to death if you are a chef to Barack and Michelle Obama are 100%. He's had 2 chefs, 2 of them have drowned. One of them far away in Mexico, the latest in the garden of Barack and Michelle Obama's home, where he worked as their private chef. He was out waterboarding. Oh no, that's what the Americans did in Guantanamo Bay. He was out paddling on a board in the water in the garden of the former President Barack Obama's house. He went missing, as did the person who was on the paddleboard with him. That person has not yet been identified, but many speculate that it was President Obama himself. When the rescuers found the body of the unfortunate second chef to die by drowning whilst in the employ of Barack Obama, they discovered blunt force injuries to his head and have not been able yet to locate who else was on the board, even though the compound is crawling with Secret Service agents, even though the compound is festooned with security cameras, even though there are G-men literally living in the house. But then that's what happened with the cocaine in the Situation Room of the White House just a week or so ago. So the feds are looking hard for the unfortunate chef's co-paddler, but have not yet been able to identify him. You seeing a pattern here? The chef of the president, the second chef of the president, dies by drowning. There are secret computer files secreted in the house of Hillary Clinton. There are drugs in the house of Joe Biden. There's a male prostitute in the house of Nancy Pelosi. There's all kinds of strange things happening at the top of the American political class. But one of the strangest occurred this very day. The 81-year-old makes Joe Biden look like a young lad. The 81-year-old Mitch McConnell, leader of Congress, leader of the Democratic Party, literally had a mental health episode live on television at a press conference and was led away, hopefully for his sake, for a long and peaceful retirement. But probably not, because they never retire. Joe Biden is running for another 4-year term. Nancy Pelosi is still turning up like a bad penny. She's 83. Klaus Schwab is, I think, 88 or 89. George Soros is 93. And yet these people are continuing to run the show in Washington. And worse, that show has apparent hegemony in every theater across the so-called Western world. That's right. These people are your leaders, whether you are an American or not. Mitch McConnell, Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Klaus Schwab, George Soros, your government are following them and their diktat, to your detriment, indeed, maybe even to your fatal, disastrous outcome. Let's take a quick look at the brain freeze of Mr. Mitch McConnell.
bipartisan cooperation and a string of
Are you good, Mitch?
Okay, Mitch?
Just checking.
Anything else you want to say, or should we just go back to your office? Do you want to say anything else to the press?
Go ahead, John.
I'll take it. Let's go back to you.
Go ahead, John.
Well, this is elder abuse on a grand scale in technicolor, and it's not a pretty sight, even for someone who hates the American political class, as I freely confess I do. Every day, Joe Biden has an episode not that dissimilar to that one suffered by McConnell. Perhaps, unfortunately, he's never struck dumb. It's what he says that is the problem. This week, he claimed that he had cured cancer as we know it. I'm not making that up. It's easily accessible on the web. He said he'd cured cancer as we know it, which will have come as a surprise to all those who've lost people to cancer during the tenure of Joe Biden, and all those who will lose people to cancer until somebody comes along that actually is able to cure cancer as we know it. Why am I dwelling on all these things? Well, because these people have got their finger on the nuclear button. Nancy Pelosi, aged 83 and up to the gills in Jack Daniels, whose husband was cavorting with a male prostitute who then violently assaulted him in Pelosi's own private home, she flew to Taiwan and almost started World War III. Joe Biden goes to bed every night with the nuclear football at the bottom of that bed, which, if he pulled the switches, would end life on the planet. Unless, of course, we're rescued by the aliens. We now know, at least according to a man who looked and was named rather like an alien, a Mr. Grush, I think, who's a whistleblower from the department in the US government tasked with researching, investigating unidentified flying objects and their incidents that they have uncovered over many decades, says that biological, non-human remains are in the possession of the United States government. Now, this actually might be just a look over there, a weather balloon moment, to try and distract our attention from the disasters unfolding all around us. Or it might be true. I personally have no dog in the fight. Seems to me unlikely that of all the gin joints in all the worlds that life only walked into ours, that seems extremely unlikely, especially given the cod that we're making of life on this planet. Seems unlikely to me that we are as good as it gets. Seems unlikely to me that nowhere in this universe or in the multiple verses that undoubtedly occur, coming in and out through the black holes I'll warrant, that no life anywhere has, does, or has ever existed. That seems unlikely to me. On the other hand, if they arrived here, what would they make of the most powerful, richest country in the entire world being ruled by Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, and Mitch McConnell, who take their orders from Klaus Schwab and George Soros? I reckon they'd scratch their heads, get back into their flying saucers, and spin away to somewhere with more sense. Let me close this monologue by some reflections on the war. Tomorrow night, I'll be addressing a No to NATO, No to War rally, and we will be looking at the extent to which the war has moved south. We've called it the Odessa Files. There it is there. Great speakers, Dean O'Brien, Patrick Henningsen, Lucy Morgan Edwards, Niall McRae, and yours truly. That starts at 7 p.m. UK time tomorrow night on all my usual platforms. But we're talking about it because Odessa is a very important place. And even in the recent history, occupies an iconic place in the attempted genocide of the Russian-speaking and ethnically Russian population of the eastern part of Ukraine after the US and EU inspired and financed and armed coup d'etat in Kiev in 2014. The burning to death in the trade union house in Odessa of dozens of people who were merely peacefully protesting their rejection at the overthrow of the elected government in Kiev and the driving of the elected president from the country just ahead of a mob bent on taking his life, had taken refuge in a trade union center. And the fascists, who then as now infest the western part of Ukraine, particularly its inner circles, burned them to death, setting the trade union house on fire. It is exceedingly unlikely that Russia will not seek to take back the indisputably Russian city of Odessa, and in doing so, render landlocked whatever stump Western Ukrainian state remains at the end of this conflict. And if so, undoubtedly will lead to the incorporation of Transnistria, the breakaway republic, broken away from Moldova, broken away in turn from Romania. Transnistria and the entire Black Sea coast will become Russian territory, leaving a landlocked and impoverished Western Ukrainian entity, if at all, on your lap, at your expense, another Kosovo, a garrison, and an unending source of problems and trouble right across Europe, from trafficked people, prostitution, drugs, weapons, and organized crime of all kinds. Good luck to you paying for that for the rest of your lives. We've got top guests this evening, so let me get to them now. Stay tuned. It's the one and only Larry Johnson coming up next after this short break. Stay tuned.